All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for attending. So we're here today to talk a little bit about the political future of hemp. JD does these at every Champs trade show around the country, which although there are so many a year, it does so happen that politics can move, especially right now, at a pace where these updates can kind of eclipse one another and a lot of new information to be had. So there's a talk right after this at 2 o'clock where they'll be going into the rulemaking process in Texas in particular. So we're going to try to cover everything outside of that. That includes what's happening on the national level with everything related to the Mitch McConnell hemp ban that passed back in November. And then, of course, the executive order and any potential extensions that we might get for the hemp industry, extending that 2018 Farm Bill definition. And then we'll also dive into some of the state-by-state fights that are coming up in the legislative sessions that have just started all over the country. And JD will dive into a few particular states. We'll try to wrap that up in about 30-40 minutes and then leave plenty of time for a Q&A period at the end. Feel free to ask about anything, although I will say we'll probably defer to the Texas Hemp Business Council for any particular rulemaking commentary related to DSHS or the legislative process here in Texas. So we'll start with the federal level changes. Of course, we saw that Mitch McConnell ban go through, and I will talk a little bit about some of the extension language that's currently being debated in Congress as we come up on a continuing resolution here on January 30th. But JD, I'd love if you could give some color. What were we experiencing in October, November, December, and how did we get to this point where we have executive coverage and this debate around an extension happening?
Sure. So it's important to note that September 30th was meant to be a continuing resolution that was going to keep the government funded, keep everything open and operational. When the government shut down, Congress, really the Senate, went into a heated debate about healthcare funding, food stamps, a myriad of different subject matters. And the issue that really we found ourselves in is the longest government shutdown in United States history is a very intense debate on the Senate floor. And we found ourselves shoved right in the middle of that in the dark of night by Mitch McConnell, as we all know. Now, preceding that, back in July, Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul had a debate in the One Big Beautiful Bill. So we kind of had some foreshadowing about what could happen, and it just so happens that it actually happened. Now, the original negotiation between Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell, going back to July, ended with a 1-year sunset clause, right? Effectively, they're going to ban hemp, but it's going to take a year to implement. He was good and stayed true to that negotiation in that final draft of that bill. So now we find ourselves here. We're waiting, for that ban to be implemented. Now, we, as the political operators, the lobby teams, and advocates, are working tirelessly. Now, to speed up, let's come to October. For those of you who know me and know my fights in Florida, you know that I worked very hard to get a veto from Governor Ron DeSantis, okay? This is important context because when a state legislature passes a bill and it goes to the governor, there is always a period of time before the governor has to sign per the state's constitution. We call that window a veto period. That is where the governor is analyzing every bill that is coming to his desk and whether or not he wants to sign it, right, or veto it. The political dynamic in DC is a little bit different. Effectively, every bill that goes to the president is signed, especially the longest government shutdown in US history. As that bill made it to his desk, there was no hope to stop that bill and have him veto it. So we recognized, myself, Drew, and a few others, recognized that we were now in DC's version of a veto, right? We had lost in the legislature, we lost in Congress, and now we have to go to the executive. We have to go to the White House, and we have to get political coverage from them to go back and fix our big problem, right? So in October, and really starting much before that, but in October through November, myself and Drew worked tirelessly with the America First Agriculture Super PAC to develop an executive order to try and give political coverage for hemp to solve this problem. Now, it's a little bit different how it works in DC. The president can't write a law, he couldn't veto the bill, so there was no direct action. But what he can do is put his thoughts on paper, right? And say, we like hemp, we think you should fix hemp, here's our reasoning. And if you go back and look at the executive order that rescheduled marijuana to Schedule 3, more than half of it is dedicated to hemp. We worked very hard to produce that, advocated with the White House for what seemed like an eternity to make that happen. Now, considering the executive order has happened in early December, we're moving into our initial plan, which is an extension. It is the easiest of the options left to us. It is the easiest option to fix our political problems. We can say, hey, instead of a full regulatory bill that's going to involve the DEA, HHS, FDA, all of these agencies and their talking points, let's put an extension in, and then we'll let the experts come back to the table to negotiate through this. For us, it seems like common sense. I think a lot of business owners don't often look into or dig deep into the political process, right? And so that's why we're here having this talk. So, Drew, if you had to explain to someone the thought process behind the several bites at the apple for the executive order and the extension, what would you say beyond the CR? Because the CR might not happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in a paradigm of federal government that I would call like a unitary theory of federal government, where we've seen the executive empowered with more action since the Obama administration, because Congress has been unable to operate as what we would say business as usual. So what does that mean? Business as usual for Congress, based off the paradigms from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, would have been 12 different appropriations packages to fund the different administrative activities of the government and those key funding mechanisms. Ever since the Obama healthcare debate, and then now through Biden and Trump administrations, we have seen a deterioration of Congress's ability to pass anything outside of omnibus packages and a reliance on what we call a continuing resolution in order to fund the government. And a continuing resolution is very much the, hey, I need an extension, I didn't get my homework done, equivalent of federal politics. So when we're talking now about bites at the apple, because all we're left with is omnibus packages and continuing resolutions, these standalone concept bills just don't pass by themselves. There's no particular bill about updating the pharmaceutical industry or doing new ag policy. They get wrapped up in these big packages of legislation that include hundreds, if not thousands, of other federal actions, and then they pass in those groups. This is how we got banned in the first place in a continuing resolution that was intended to reopen the government and not have authorizing language about changing policy. And yet here we are dealing with authorizing language that banned the 2018 definition of hemp in the Farm Bill. So what JD described in this executive order, we consider that the air coverage. This is what we needed from the president's desk to indicate to Congress that the president supported not just hemp, but cannabis more broadly in terms of reform, and now they need to do something to reform it. So that something can be a lot of things, and that's what JD's alluding to by saying bites at the apple. If we see an appropriations package come through, which Republicans have indicated that they do want to get back to a 12-cycle appropriations context for the government, and they've worked on a number of appropriations over the last month that have passed. So we would love to slip into any of those. That's a bite at the apple. If they do get forced into a continuing resolution, which it's looking high likelihood that January 30th is going to require a continuing resolution, that's another bite at the apple. Or if they take an opportunity to actually put forward standalone legislation, that's another bite at the apple. Or another omnibus package where we have a lot of different legislative motions all grouped up into a single bill. That's another bite at the apple. So as many of these opportunities as we have, we're going to try to convert executive pressure into federal action. So we've already got that pressure. That's what we received from the White House through the executive order. And frankly, for us, that was a huge moment of celebration because that was a really difficult piece to get in place here. And that was so necessary for us to be able to achieve anything beyond about getting this ban fixed or getting new cannabis legislation, whether that be rescheduling or safer banking or an extension on hemp. None of that would have happened if we didn't have this rhetorical coverage from the White House telling Congress that it's necessary. And look, that's kind of a two-part thing. Yes, it's a public announcement, but it's also a lot of private phone calls. So we know from our contacts in the White House that senior White House staff like Susie Wilds, like James Blair, like Trump himself, have been calling some of these representatives in Congress and in the Senate and saying, hey, hemp and cannabis are now a part of our 2026 midterms plan. Get on board or shut up. And they are that firm with them on the phone. And that's what we need by air coverage. So now that we have that air coverage, we've been able to get introduced into Congress 2 bills. So even though we'll take any bite at the apple, think of those like exit ramps off the highway. The entrance ramps are still the traditional bill-making process. So big shout out to Justin Swanson from Bose Public Affairs for working with James Baird's office. And we were able to get Baird to introduce an extension on the hemp ban. Now, the original text of the extension that came across my desk in December said a 1-year additional. I reached back out to Justin and the members at 3Chi that were kind of underwriting James Baird here, and I said, hey, I think we need to get through the 28 election cycle. Let's try to make this thing 3 years. So we've been able to unify the industry around language that this extension needs to be 3 years long. And then when Baird introduced this bill a couple weeks ago, we were able to see that that 3-year language is what was included. So that's a huge win. We loved that. Now, that doesn't mean that that Baird bill will pass on its own. By itself, as that single 1-page piece of legislation, it probably will not make it through the Senate in particular. But we know that it has legs, and we know that it has a number of good co-sponsors. So we've seen that Griffith has expressed some support, but we also saw that Andy Barr and Evans from Colorado have officially co-sponsored the bill.
With a little bipartisan support from Angie Craig in Minnesota.
Correct.
Very important.
Okay, so then we fast forward another week and we get the introduction of the Senate Bill 3686 from Klobuchar. This is another extension for the hemp industry, and yet again, it mirrors this 3-year language. So, big checkbox. We feel like we were very successful on getting the narrative shifted around, not just another year extension, but 2 years on top of the one that we already had written into the McConnell language. Big win. And we love that everybody's singing off the same sheet of music. That matters so much in DC. When you have disparate voices or bills that have slightly differential language from each other, it makes it all the more difficult to resolve which side you actually want to finish on. So we've seen that come out of Klobuchar's office and has a number of co-sponsors there. Bipartisanly speaking, that's Rand Paul and then Merkley from Oregon. So we have both of these bills moving through. This is HR 7010 and then Senate Bill 3686. We are hoping that those will move through the House this week, which means they end up on the Senate floor in time to be considered for the January 30th continuing resolution. Now, there's a lot of pressure to try to hit that timeline, and in particular that comes from our constituents that deal on the farming side, because you've got to know if you can buy seeds this year to plant. November is not enough time to sell out of a crop that won't even be completely harvested by the time that shutdown date comes. So we're fighting to make sure that this gets included as quickly as possible and trying to lean on the White House to create that pressure in a few key offices. I would say Johnson more than anybody else, but there's certainly a lot of nose count that we have to win on the Senate side. So I feel pretty confident that the House is going to be comfortable including this 3-year extension here in the next week. It's really the Senate side where the rubber hits the road, and we need to better understand if we're going to be able to get included on that January 30th continuing resolution. But while it may be too nuanced, I don't want you to overly rely on that January 30th date as a drop dead, because as we started this conversation off, it's any bite at the apple that we can take. So even if we miss out on that January 30th continuing resolution, I assume we'll have 2 to potentially 3 more moving vehicles before what I would call March 1st or mid-March to be our drop dead date, where farmers no longer have a clean decision to make on seed purchases and have to rely on faith in the system, which is not a position that we want to put them in, and will create a lot of financial hardship in trying to determine whether or not they're going to plant this crop for next year. So that's where we stand on the federal level. While it is complicated, there's a lot to be celebrated here. This is one of the first major movements for federal drug policy that we've seen since the 1970s.
That I think actually has a chance. The Biden administration tried to do Schedule 3, and it was supposed to be a carrot and a stick situation, right? Now, for those who remember in the 2020 election cycle, Nancy Pelosi passed out of the House a marijuana legalization bill right before the election, right? Signaling that Democrats would support legalization of cannabis. What happened? They win the 2020 election, and they get no real progress in Congress. Now, by the time Biden's administration got around to starting the rescheduling process and many administrative processes in DC take 12, 18, sometimes 24 months, right? The wheels of government turn slowly. This administration still has 3 years left. So they start this process, it will happen. Litigation be damned, excuse my French. I just think that it's important to note that rescheduling has a lot of unknowns, and whether we call it hemp, we call it marijuana, we unify and call it cannabis, rescheduling is the most progress the cannabis industry has ever seen, right? In 100 years. We actually have a real chance at it. So I think that was important to point out. Now, the hemp extension gives us an opportunity to, I think, one day in the hopefully near future, unify these 2 categories. But it's important to note that rescheduling, when it's implemented, even if there's litigation, there are still 3 years for it to play out, and will likely be done by the time the next presidential election comes around. So,
and to wrap our federal discussion, I'd love to just talk about our broad, high-level view of how we're using leverage and strategy from the 30,000-foot view. Not particularly related to getting this included in the CR, but when we're thinking about how do we make sure that we do get rescheduling, that we do get safe and safer banking, that we're able to get 4 pillars of regulation for hemp, marketing restrictions, 21 plus, advertising restrictions, and testing. And then, of course, our 3-year extension. The Republicans need something from us, and that is they need a leg up in 2026. They are looking at a very tough midterm re-election, and the president has decided that there are a number of issues that he is going to turn into Republican Party standards so that he can fundraise from larger corporations for media and ad spend. This is politics. It is run by super PACs, and it is run by ad spend. If you do not hit them in the ballot box, they will not feel you hitting them. So it's what do they care about, and how can we generate that type of leverage? We've been able to put together a number of different polls, which are really just a litmus test of what does the public think. But they're so important for the president and the senior White House advisors determining how they're going to engage Congress and what they're going to prioritize legislatively, because the polling informs them how they'll perform in midterms with or without certain actions. And we've seen from polling that we did in December that there's a really key group of borderline Republican voters that care deeply about this hemp issue and about the issues related to marijuana or cannabis generally, and are willing to pull their votes, either not showing up to the ballot box or switching over to the other party if their needs are not met on this issue. And Texas was such a wonderful example of this, where we saw Greg Abbott's polling numbers do 20 points better after the hemp veto, and we saw the lieutenant governor polling 10 to 15 points worse after trying to die on that hill. That signal is leverage in DC. So we have wonderful polling information to create leverage, and then the one missing piece that's left is a big missing piece. It's called $50 to $100 million of ad spend. And that is what we were trying to put together. We have worked with a bunch of multi-state operators. I know that's a swear word in this community, but we have got to raise money from everyone. We are working with banks, we are working with the largest distributors, we are working with multi-state operators, and we're putting together messaging for the Republican Party quarterbacks to spend this PAC money for themselves in the 2026 election cycle. And they know that that promise of funding for media and ad spend is a quid pro quo for a hemp extension, pillars of regulation for hemp, marijuana rescheduling, and safe and safer banking. So that's sort of the 10,000-foot strategic view of how we're creating leverage with the White House and how we're trying to push the Republican Party toward a prescience for why they need to get this done now. And they do understand that this is happening before the 26th election cycle.
I also think it's important to note, this is the first time the Republican Party has taken a significant position on anything cannabis related, okay? Every prior, going back to Mitt Romney in 2012, Trump in 2016, every Republican, really national politician, has not really spoken about it. Now, you go and look at the red states, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, some of the biggest voting blocks for the national presidential election for Republicans, and what do you see? Those states have hemp, right? Hemp is red state weed. So the voting base for Republicans have access to hemp, right? And the blue states, many of them, all have medical or recreational marijuana. So if you bifurcate that issue and understand that it's all under the cannabis umbrella, it comes down to politics and words. The words on paper for red state weed is hemp. The word on paper for blue state weed is cannabis or marijuana. And so having the Republican Party take this position, and for those of you who don't really pay attention, I'm going to get a little wonky here. The chairman of the Republican National Committee is a guy named Joe Gruters. He is a Florida state senator. I have worked with him in his office for the last decade on all things cannabis, issues, vaping even. Joe Gruters was just named, after Whatley decided to run for North Carolina Senate, was just named the chairman of the RNC. Joe Gruters also last year was in a True Leave commercial for recreational marijuana for the ballot initiative, right? So I view this more as a generational issue. Joe Gruters, I think, is probably in his late 40s. The younger you go in the Republican Party, the more you see this positive attitude towards cannabis. We just happen to call it hemp. So, I think moving forward, the Republican Party is taking a position that is net positive. It's how do we figure out how to combine the two issues, understanding that the voting base for red states is hemp related, and understanding that the voting base for blue states is marijuana related, and combining those two eventually. It's going to be complicated because there's a myriad of laws and complexities, but we've got safer banking. We all know that we have access to credit card processors and banks, et cetera. Marijuana does not have that. And so the banks see the marijuana side and the safer banking issue as an opportunity to really open up a brand new market they don't have access to. Tens of thousands of dispensaries all over the country, right? And so if you start looking at kind of logistical and political realities, it all makes sense. We have to unify, although separate definitions for now, we have to unify these two issues in the long term. So.
And certainly even the nuance of hemp versus cannabis inside DC politics, these are folks who are focused on Venezuela, international energy economies, healthcare issues. This is not a priority for them, which sometimes is very bad for us when Mitch McConnell makes it his priority and then uses all of his political capital to force something through. Nobody's going to stand up and die for us because they don't care too much about us. But now we have a wonderful situation where we might be able to help them by 3-5 points in some key midterm elections. That's a big number. That's enough of a number to care about. And what do they care about the legislation that has to go with it to get those 3 to 5 points? They're not that read in on this issue. They're not that read in on an understanding of why it was banned in the first place, or even that it's banned. They probably see it already in their community and in their constituency and thought it was legal anyways. So we're have a really nice flight path to make it through kind of unscathed now that Mitch McConnell has played his cards and frankly is not that friendly with the administration and is not seeking re-election in 2026 because of his advanced age. So I think we have a really good trajectory at the federal level to get this done. This extension is going to be the next point where we kind of prove what's going on. But the last champs talk that we had was here, and we were talking about how necessary getting this executive order was. And I know in the happy hours and dinners after that, I had talked with many business leaders who didn't believe that this executive order was actually happening and didn't have faith that we were going to be able to achieve this from the White House. That was a huge domino. I cannot overstate how big of a deal it is that we're getting air coverage from the executive branch to make some of these legislative changes. So, very positive spin on what's going on there at the federal level, and hopefully in the next week or two, we might even have this extension locked down that means another 3 years of money-making opportunities in the hemp industry with now protection rather than neglect from the federal government.
Real quick, I think just to point out, going back to October, November, as we were talking about the executive order with many business leaders, there were a lot of people that really didn't believe it was going to happen. Go figure, working with the most powerful office in the known universe is incredibly secretive and difficult and disparate and opaque. There was a lot of things throughout that process that we couldn't talk about. Zoom calls we were having for 2-3 hours, going over language, going over different personalities inside the White House, and we literally couldn't talk about it, right? We could overarching talk about the big narrative and talk about the need for the executive order, but no details could be shared. And so, I just point out, in working with the White House, this is my first time doing so, it's been very uncomfortable, right? You're literally talking to the most powerful office in the world. They could, do all kinds of crazy stuff. In working with them, they direct the traffic, right? I know we worked on one 10-page document midway through November. We spent 2 weeks on this document, right? And the day we're getting ready to release it, they said, nope, you can't do that. And you just kind of got to live with it, right? It's difficult for us as advocates and working with them and developing this process going back and forth to be able to illustrate to everybody that we're talking to what's actually happening behind closed doors. So, I just point that out. I think that was a really uncomfortable period, but we got through it. The executive order happened. Now we've got the White House political air cover. For those of you who didn't watch it, the executive order press conference was incredible. There were white lab coats. There was Paige Figge, Charlotte Figge from Charlotte's Web, Charlotte Figge's mother, the VFW, the American Legion, representatives from every walk of life were standing behind the president. And I think that was just a refutation of 100 years of anti-cannabis policy. And it was just an incredible sight to see. So I know we want to talk about the states.
Yeah.
Yep.
So all that to say, we have a positive flight path on the federal level. What I think and what we discussed as the Mitch McConnell language passed out of the Fed is because we'd already had some of these discussions with the executive branch and we're relatively confident we'd be able to get some executive order and this air coverage that we need. The Mitch McConnell language, though, has set us up for a knockdown, drag-out fight in every state capital across the country that was already considering a potential hemp ban. Because now they see what's currently live at the federal level is a ban that's only got a couple months left before it actually takes place. And these state-by-state legislative fights are starting right now. Every single state capital is opening sometime between January 1st and January 15th. Some of them only run for a month. A couple of them don't open this year. But broadly speaking, we're going to have about 30 to 35 state-by-state fights that are all going to be incredibly difficult. Now, JD will give you some color on the state fights that have already begun and the ones that are currently happening. But I just want to say that this is that moment when every state legislator opens, we're monitoring 20 plus bills in any given state at every time to see which one might have legs. And many of them contain extremely restrictive language about hemp at best, and at worst, full out bans that mirror the federal hemp ban. That there's very little air coverage on the state level to get that changed while this policy still stands at the federal. So we're certainly fighting for this extension language to buy us more time in the state-by-state politics. But JD, if you don't mind, I'd love if you could give some color on Illinois, New Jersey, and Ohio, as I know those state fights are already, moving rapidly.
Mm-hmm. So I'll do you one better. So I know we said we're going into session now. Immediately following the Mitch McConnell ban, okay, we're talking mid-November, late November, early December, New Jersey and Ohio, both. We've fought. We've spent millions of dollars in both of those states advocating. Lobbyists, attorneys, lawsuits, PR. We've been fighting in those states for years. The second that Mitch McConnell ban went into place, those legislatures said, you know what, we were kind of leaning one way or the other. We could have gone either way, but now this federal ban gives us the perfect excuse to succinctly pass our bans on hemp. And so those bans have already gone into place. Both governors have already signed it. New Jersey and Ohio are living in two very different realities than they were prior to the Mitch McConnell ban politically. Now, in Ohio, we'll start with Ohio. The White House and leadership in DC may have a real opportunity to step in and save it, because it's the president's executive order that he thinks, we got to save hemp. We may be able to go back to a Vivek Ramaswamy, who is likely going to win the governorship in Ohio, to fix this. Now, we're entering into a referendum. For those that don't know, constitutional ballot initiatives and referendums, these are the things that are halfway down your ballot, beyond the politicians. I always ask you questions. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? We're attempting to get a referendum on the ballot for hemp in the state of Ohio. Ohio has a really unique constitution and allows them to vote up or down on a particular state bill that passed. And so the state ban passed the legislature. If we get the referendum on the ballot, the voters in Ohio will literally have an opportunity to say, yes, we want that bill to pass, or no, we don't want that bill to pass. That's going to cost us, we estimate, about $3.5 million. Most of that in petition gathering. We need to gather 250,000 petitions by middle of March. We're working with some of the largest breweries, some of the largest alcohol companies in Ohio to try and get that referendum through. It's very difficult, but they've been gracious enough, some of the petition gathering companies, to work with us and say, you've got 5,000 retail businesses. We'll have to produce a couple of YouTube videos to teach them how to properly gather petitions. That way they can be verified. If we can get those 250,000 petitions, I think we win on the ballot, right? Democrat, Republican, Independent, everybody likes cannabis. So whether it's a red state or a blue state, if they see something that's anti-cannabis, I think the voters are going to go our way. That is being coupled with a lawsuit. We're working on some legal theories right now. Back in 22 and 23, there were some huge lawsuits. Arkansas is one that comes to mind that a lot of people think of, right? In the early years of the 2018 Farm Bill, there was no federal court precedence. And so every time we took an argument, if we were salient and relevant and our arguments made a lot of sense, oftentimes the federal courts went in our favor. Now, over the last 4 or 5 years, there has been precedent set in Virginia, in Arkansas, in Alaska, in California, in the Ninth Circuit. And as that precedence inside the federal court system has built up, now the judges have a body of law that they can look at that actually informs their decisions, and a lot of it is actually anti-hemp. Because we're arguing some very basic constitutional principles, interstate commerce, equal protections, et cetera, some very basic concepts. The problem with that is the legislatures have also learned. The legislatures have gotten better. As the courts have struck down different laws in different states, they've learned, we shouldn't write it this way that would unnecessarily impede interstate commerce. We should write it this way. This way we still get the ban we want, but it doesn't affect interstate commerce and the feds aren't gonna kick our bill out, right? So Ohio's lawsuit, we've done a lot of digging. I think we've probably spent $30,000 just in legal research. And the attorneys are telling us slim chance. That lawsuit might not work. Now, to take a $250,000 federal litigative attack against a bill, knowing going in that it might not work, is a scary concept. A lot of business owners don't want to waste $250,000. I understand that. But going into legal fights, you have to understand that as the precedent builds up, as the body of law builds up, your arguments get smaller and smaller and more succinct and more complicated. Our lawsuit in New Jersey from last year is a good example. In 2024, the New Jersey State Legislature passed a bill that I would say was ham-handedly, lazily written, and it directly implicated the United States Constitution and interstate commerce. That lawsuit cost us $550,000 to get one decision and to keep that decision in place. So now the same legislature in New Jersey, the same legislator in the Senate who didn't like us, who passed the original bill that we went to the court and had struck down, she saw a perfect opportunity to produce a bill, file that bill, and in 2 weeks pass that bill to ban hemp again. And this time she wrote it without that interstate commerce issue from the first version. New Jersey doesn't have the same referendum mechanism. They don't have the same ballot initiative mechanism to save their state. So there's likely going to need to be a large lawsuit and then an immediate legislative fix. Now, as we've illustrated on the federal side, it is very, very difficult to go back to the same legislature or the same Congress that just banned you and say, whoa, 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 you made a mistake, let's rewrite that. That is very difficult to do, right? And so the political dynamic in DC is that we had to go to the White House, get the executive order, and bring that back down to Congress to give us the political air cover. In New Jersey, the political dynamic is a little different because they have off-year elections. They have a new governor who is probably getting sworn in actually right now, as a matter of fact. Mikey Sherrill just won as a Democrat for the state of New Jersey back in November. She's being inaugurated today. I was actually honored to be named to her transition team. Hemp and cannabis is a big issue in their state. I've talked to senior staff on her staff. They're supportive of the issue, but it's complicated insofar as they're new on the job and don't have an ironed out position on the issue yet. Now, broadly, a politician may say, I'm supportive of cannabis, but when you start looking at the details and the actual economics between hemp and marijuana and dispensaries versus smoke shops, and you start looking at all the details, you'll form your own opinion. They haven't had time. I think, they've been in office all of an hour as of right now. And so for them to figure out that position and bring the gubernatorial, overarching political support for our issue back down to their state legislature in less than 6 months to fix something that the legislature just passed is very difficult. So we have to do a lawsuit, we have to provide air cover via the executive, and we have to go back and fix it legislatively, and that's going to be very expensive, right? That's probably going to cost us grand total with a lawsuit, maybe $2 million, just to fix this ban. Otherwise, every store and every distributor in the state of New Jersey will no longer be able to sell hemp products, in April. So, big problem.
Do you mind elaborating on Ohio as well?
Yeah. So I talked about the referendum. I talked about the lawsuit and the potential and how difficult that's going to be. We met with Vivek Ramaswamy, about a month and a half ago. We explained to him what was happening in DC. He knows all the players. For those who don't know him, he ran for president. He was a favorite. Him and just a few others, had a real likelihood of success coming out of Iowa. DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Vivek. Now, Vivek is very popular in Republican circles, very popular in Ohio, but again, he's not going to be in office for another year. If he wins in November, which we think he will, he doesn't get inaugurated until January. By the time that happens, the ban will have been implemented and he won't really have a chance to save the current businesses. He may implement a new bill that has a lower barrier to entry, but that would be 4, 5, 6 months after the ban is implemented. What we're trying to do with Vivek, for those who don't follow Ohio politics, Governor DeWine has been our enemy in Ohio for 2 years. Came out publicly against us, I think, in 23, 24, and has just continued to beat that drum. We're trying to say if Vivek is the new Republican Party, Vivek is the younger generation, Vivek is a representative of new political paradigms inside the Republican Party, that he should take the position that hemp and lower barriers to entry for small businesses that sell cannabis products is the Republican position, and the president's executive order is proof of that. So as he's running for governor, after the meeting we took with him, we've gotten reports from on the ground that he is speaking positively about cannabis. And for those that don't know Vivek, he was not very pro-cannabis before that meeting and before some direction. Maybe just because of propaganda, but really he just didn't pay attention to the issue and just had this generally negative, thought about it. So I think referendum, lawsuit, and then going back to the legislature, using the political air cover of the next executive may be the recipe to save Ohio.
And I know you've taken a lot of flights to Illinois lately and been working in the city of Chicago. Do you mind giving some color for Illinois state fight as well as that fight in the city of Chicago in particular?
So Illinois is one of my favorites.
Thank you.
I was actually born in Chicago, fun fact. Although I grew up in Florida, I was born in Chicago. I have family that still lives there. It's got a soft spot in my heart. And long story, but my cousin was a leading Democrat fundraiser. She actually helped run the Hillary Clinton campaign in the 2016 election. When the Illinois fight first started, and let's call it late 21, early 22, I called my cousin. I'm like, oh my God, I know you're big in the Democrat Party out there, can you help me? And she helped us build a lobby team that included the governor's best friend, J.B. Pritzker's best friend and closest confidant. Last year, 25, beginning of 25, the first week of January of 25, they had a veto session. And the governor was applying a ton of pressure to ban hemp, right? Cresco, Columbia Care, Green Thumb Industries, some of the largest multi-state operators and marijuana companies are based in Chicago. It's their financial hub, right? We fought back, and oddly enough, we built a very strong coalition of veterans, the Black Caucus, some really great local Chicago advocates that stood up for us. And there's a funny story, you can actually look it up. I say it's funny, it's probably very sad for her. One of the governor's staffers exited a Democratic caucus meeting crying because the governor wanted the ban, and the Democratic caucus said no. The Speaker of the House was on our side on the issue. I think for their position, the Democratic caucus, and the Speaker and others, they don't want to see recriminalization of cannabis in any form. We can have an economic debate, but when the law would directly make products illegal that would put people in prison, they were not agreeable to that idea. So fast forward to today, we've been working with Mayor Johnson's office. A great friend of mine, Craig Katz, has been working very closely with them in Chicago. The mayor was broadly supportive, right? And he actually put it in his 2026 budget, and then the Mitch McConnell ban happened. So another symptom of the Mitch McConnell ban, the ban is put into place in mid-November. By early December, the first week of December, Mayor Johnson has pulled hemp out of his budget line item. They intended to tax it. They're going to tax it at 10% and increase that tax in the Chicago metro area, and that was going to help them fund. They estimated, I think, their actuaries and accountants estimated something like $50 million in direct revenue to the city. Mitch McConnell ban happens. That $50 million, for them, politically, they thought it was just going away. They remove it from the budget. And now several of the different districts, they're different aldermen, as their version of city council, different aldermen from different districts who have really strong dispensaries. If you Google, right, best dispensaries in Chicago, and you find the 5-star, 2,000 reviews, the biggest dispensaries, and then you look up the aldermen that represent those districts, go figure, they're co-signers of a bill to ban hemp in the city of Chicago. Pretty funny. So we're dealing with that. The speaker is still, pro-hemp, still positive. And as things have developed in DC, I think a lot of these states have been paying attention, and we'll see how that develops in DC and informs the lower state and city fights. But in Chicago specifically, if the city council is successful in passing the bill, I think we can get the mayor to veto it. It'll be an expensive veto campaign with the mayor, but I think we can pull it off. So.
All right, I'd love to open it up to a little bit of Q&A, although I have two kind of inflammatory things that I'd love to lay on you guys real quick. So we're not, of course, the only organization that does political representation for the hemp industry. And there are two themes that I think we've hit some friction with in trying to come to conclusions with some other lobbying colleagues of ours on how this is appropriately done. And I thought that Chicago was a really good transition point there. We are going to fight with multi-state operators in these state-by-state fights across the country. Fighting with them on the state level in no way indicates that they are our enemy on the federal level. And I know that this is kind of a gross cognitive dissonance for many of you, as we have been, we've worked on several vetoes in the past that fly directly in the face of the $100 million lobbying effort of some multi-state operators. We have to unify with them in DC, or we're gonna get eaten alive. We have to work with Trulieve, we have to work with Curaleaf. Jushi's probably a lost cause. Cresco probably isn't. Like, every single one of these on a one-by-one basis, we need to be doing the same media and ad spend with them and coordinating with them on how they're engaging with the White House. Nothing will get Kim Rivers out of Trump's office. Nothing will get Howard Kessler out of Trump's office. We have to think, what do we have to do to get into Trump's office? And working with those two individuals is tantamount to having a seat at that table. We will fight with them in Illinois and in Ohio, in Oregon, in Florida, in South Carolina. On any of these individual states, there will be horse trading, and we will see what feels like betrayals from cannabis companies in trying to gain market share.
And not just them, also alcohol, correct. Also potentially pharma, also potentially pharmacies. There's a myriad of different opponents that we face on a daily basis. You said South Carolina, I just want to touch on this. Right now, as we speak, in South Carolina, the alcohol industry is trying to take all of hemp and put it in the three-tiered system. We just saw that happen in Alabama. And the problem with that is they align themselves with the private prison systems, the sheriff's associations, the police departments, and police chiefs associations. After the three-tiered system bill passed in Alabama, the first person arrested for a felony vape possession was a single mother of 3 children. She had a Delta 8 vape sitting in her cup holder, had no idea the bill passed. She's now facing 10 years in prison for having a Delta 8 vape in her cup holder, right? So we've got to be really, really consistent in saying that there are a myriad of opponents. Our entire position, my entire position, has been cannabis for all. Low barriers to access, low barriers to entry for consumers and small business owners alike. Alcohol, marijuana, maybe pharma, maybe pharmacies. These groups are going to continue to be our opponents. But in a democratic republic, especially one with our system of government, we have got to be willing to debate and sit at the table with these people. If you just paint them as an enemy with a broad brush and you don't engage with them, they're going to view you as unreasonable. They're going to view you as not willing to debate. Why aren't you willing to debate? Are you hiding from the science? Are you hiding from the facts of your industry? And if that's the case, they will just steamroll you, right? There's been a lot of negative news media. An investigative journalist named Steve Robinson went on the largest Republican podcast in the United States, Tucker Carlson, and then followed it up with Sean Ryan, probably the largest veteran podcast in the United States, and told a ton of lies, spread a ton of propaganda about the hemp industry, right? And that led to the political air cover to ban hemp. No one from the hemp industry went on Sean Ryan to debate him. No one went on Tucker Carlson to debate him. The loudest voice in the room just happened last week when Rand Paul went on Joe Rogan. 3 months too late. The ban already happened. we have to engage in these debates behind closed doors and very publicly. We cannot be afraid to engage with these people. If we are afraid to engage with them, if we paint them as opponents and enemies, they will use that against us, right? So I think it's a great point. I didn't mean to stop you there.
No. I think that we've been accused of having some cognitive dissonance about this point. I know that we've had the reputation of working too closely with some of these institutions in the past. And I just want to take it head on and say that we think, especially when it comes to the federal government, that coalition building with the beverage industry that has tried to cut our throat, with MSOs that have tried to cut our throat, with pharmaceutical companies that could squish us under their heel, is the only path to executive action, and strong legislative action, which means mixing funds with the enemy in a super PAC that does massive ad spend for 2026. And those funds will be mixed and spent on ads at the same time that they are trying to kill us on different state-by-state fights. So this is just a normal cognitive dissonance in politics, but I just want to take that criticism head on, as I know this room in particular is sensitive to some of those issues, and of course we are. I mean, every one of you knows the history of how these things have developed on a state-by-state level. So I just want to address it directly and say that we are well aware of how insane it seems that we want to be in an organization with Kim Rivers. And yet at the same time, I will tell you, it is the best path forward for a strong federal resolution. And then the other inflammatory point, perhaps not as bad as the first one. No pre-negotiating ever. No negotiating before you get to the negotiating table. I don't want to hear about milligram caps from any industry participants. I don't want to hear about beverage carve-outs. I don't want to hear about synthetic bans, flavor bans, whatever the soup of the day is for a regulatory thing that we could, if we just cut these people out, then the rest of us are good actors. It is played out. And we have done ourselves a deep disservice by bringing these issues up too early in the negotiating legislative process, and then having legislators who have no idea what this plan even is talk to me about a milligram cap. They don't even know what THC is. Why are they asking me about milligrams? And the answer is because some well-intentioned company went in there with the idea that they would let us live if we would only agree to a 10 milligram cap. I don't know what they're gonna ask for, but let them ask for it first. Because it could be a point of sale restriction. It could be beverage only. It could be some kind of a milligram cap. Don't pick it for them. And we have to be unified with each other. No more good actor this, bad actor this. A bad product is a bad product. A consumer being mistreated or exploited is a consumer being mistreated or exploited. There is no single category of company or type of person that engages in those bad behaviors. Those are just bad behaviors that we have to get out of this industry, and we're not going to solve that by all agreeing to be a beverage-only marketplace or no more vapes or some kind of milligram cap. So those are my two highly inflammatory positions. Apologies for tacking those on there at the end, but I wanted to address them straight on, as I know that this group, you all deal with many of the other alphabet soup lobbying organizations, and those are the two things that I think JD and I agree on thematically that have kind of set us at odds with a number of organizations over the last few months, all of whom we are trying to work as closely with as possible. So on that lovely note, I will open it up to Q&A. Please feel free to ask about anything we've talked about already or clarity on something simple. There are really no dumb questions when it comes to politics. This process doesn't make sense to anybody. So feel free to ask anything. And go ahead and just stand up where you are if you have a question.
I'll say this, starting with those inflammatory positions, I kind of want like a giant cardboard sign that just says "change my mind" right in front of us.
No.
You know, it's kind of what it feels like. Any questions? There is no such thing as a dumb question.
Go ahead.
I'm from Chicago. I run 3 companies manufacturing of hemp. I heard about a lot of the news from South Carolina. The federal come to their wholesale, empty everything. There is no ban in South Carolina. Okay, For me, as a manufacturing, I don't have a problem because I have my license. But for my customers in the future in Chicago, there is no ban.
So-
How that happen and how can I sell, how can I give the safest to put it on the shelf for my customers and other states?
So South Carolina is an interesting one. Now, I'm going to take you all the way back to the 2018 Farm Bill, okay? The 2018 Farm Bill was the base level federal framework. It's a few sentences. Everybody knows the words, isomers, extracts, salts, etc. 0.3% Delta 9. They directed, via the USDA, every state to create a hemp program. Those hemp programs were then fed back to the USDA as the executive branch arm that would approve or disapprove of those hemp programs, right? Every single state in the country has a slightly different definition, implementation, how it played out across the past few years. South Carolina, in particular, their hemp program that they got approved in 2019 says you must have a cultivator's license to possess raw hemp material, okay? Raw hemp material, for us, you might think of a farm, right? There's a big tractor, they go and cut down all the flower and all the plants. That is raw hemp material, kind of in our mind, right? But what it means to the government is flour, pre-rolls, anything in a bag that looks or smells like flour, that's to them raw hemp material. And so in South Carolina, although it's not technically illegal, and I think you could probably take it to court, for all intents and purposes, flour is illegal, right? The Attorney General wrote an opinion letter on it. The Attorney General even asked the DEA back in, I think, 21 or 22 about it. That raid is, I think back in 23 in engaging in South Carolina, when we set up the South Carolina Healthy Alternative State chapter, we went to the AG, the Attorney General. We went to the governor's office. I met with McMaster's chief of staff personally, and they all told us flour is illegal. And we've tried to spread that awareness throughout the state of South Carolina, but many people didn't listen, or they didn't know, or they weren't aware. One thing I advocate for, whether you do it through someone like us, through an association, or you find an attorney who specializes in this and hire your own inside, outside general counsel, have someone go through your state's laws, right? And understand what those state laws actually mean for your business. Because as a business owner, I think I'm a fellow entrepreneur, I own a few retail stores, I like to move fast and break things. We're coming out of 100 years of cannabis prohibition. When you move fast and break things post-prohibition, you go to jail. It's not you get a fine, right? If your state doesn't lay out specifically an administrative code or an administrative code violation that it's associated with a civil money penalty, it's a lot of words. Basically, if it's not a fine on paper, when you are in possession of something that is illegal, it is considered a controlled substance and leads to jail time. So in the state of Florida, for instance, we have an amazing hemp program. And if you're caught with something, what we would call maybe traditional marijuana or cannabis, simply it's non-compliant hemp. And there's just a fine associated with it. But in states where that system doesn't exist, it's still illegal. It is still a Schedule I narcotic, and they can still charge you as such. So in Illinois, you've got a different situation, thank God. The Illinois law, I don't know how many times I've drafted or redrafted different variations of state laws in that state, but the state law is in such a way, and their hemp program is in such a way, that flour is legal. And it's broadly sold throughout the state. It's funny, one of my close friends, the prior president of the Illinois Healthy Alternatives, a guy named Justin, after the Mitch McConnell ban went into place, he sought a marijuana license, of course, to hedge his bet, but he has a humongous greenhouse in southern Illinois in Mary Miller's district. Mary Miller, who tried to kill us in 2024 in Congress. And he's given tours to all these state politicians. He's let in state senators, state reps. I think he even invited the governor's staff. And he grows some of the best THCA flower in the country. It's amazing. I think he won High Times in like 23 or 24. But every state is different. And so I would just tell you to either hire an attorney, join our association, engage with us, and we'll do a detailed analysis, or your attorney will, a detailed analysis of the products you carry, what you should and should not carry. And if your state doesn't have an administrative arm that's going to come in and tell you what you're doing wrong, Just be prepared. Watch all your P's and Q's. Have your COAs on hand for every product you carry. So if they come in, you at least have a legal defense to prevent yourself from whether going to jail or getting fined. It's a great question. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
I'll just start by saying thank you. I really want these spaces to be like standing room only, and I get a little disappointed. And like, so thank you for everybody also showing up in here, because I think it's.
When it was just the band, we had to bring in 10 extra chairs.
Yeah.
But you know, the second it gets a little quiet.
I really want more advocacy for our community, and I feel like the hemp industry's kind of had their heads in the sand, and everybody's just kind of in survival mode. I've been part of I think it's all one thing, right? So I've worked in medical, I've worked in adult use, I've worked in hemp, and I really see this current ban and the rescheduling not necessarily, obviously it's not a positive thing.
Right.
And personally, my concern is that the only people that haven't capitalized on hemp or cannabis is big pharma, right? Because they haven't been able to do the research. So my current concern is that this upstream consolidation that's happening and the funding that's going to come in, that hemp kind of jumped the tracks, right? Hemp medical in the United States has failed our consumers. Yeah. We also, I think I brought up to you guys before, we don't have export, we don't have interstate commerce, we don't have banking, we can't export globally, which is like a really, really big deal. And I know that that's been my question in the past, is like, how do we get them to care that we've fallen behind the global market in all of these different categories? And now with exports, I export into international, Brazil, other places. These bans on full spectrum products, it's going to really impact consumers in the United States, but also patients, because patients have turned to hemp. Yep. And the other concern I have is that hemp it's higher standards in a lot of cases than recreational adult use. It's closer to actually pharma in a lot of ways, depending on the parts of hemp you're looking at. But a lot of the products we work in are, they're really high standards. They're European Union standards. I feel like we're overshooting the mark with the pharma. My concern is that we're not going to have the capital unless we can really gather the community to speak out. We've already have the ban in place. Like, what do we need to do? What is the call of action? I think, because do they need to hear from brands? Do they need to hear consumer? What can people do in the moment?
You want to take it? Yeah.
Like, how do we change this at a federal level? How do we get the conversation? Because otherwise I feel like we're handing over control to big pharma. Ultimately, like, a big alcohol, sure, whatever. The MSOs, ultimately, like, hemp is MSO. We're doing e-commerce, basically. So like, sure, the big MSOs like have a bad name, but literally the hemp industry is, we're multi-state operators. That's the name of the game. So I feel like I had a lot of people tell me I shouldn't be concerned about that. I had people in other lobbying groups be like, don't be concerned, this is a yellow light warning. No.
So, do not listen to that. Always be concerned. The government's always watching and they're trying to kill you. Yes. You need to fight.
So paranoia aside, which is certainly justified, Howard Kessler has made a lot of space for pharma to come into this. The president's executive order dealt very heavily with Medicaid and Medicare reimbursements related to hemp and CBD products. Now, the exact boundaries on that have not been set. We will be pushing for some pretty liberal boundaries on what definitions are reimbursable products in this program. But that's a toehold for the pharmaceutical industry and for a lot of big money healthcare interests to start looking at this material as something that's a part of their cash flows. Now, nothing on God's green earth is going to stop the pharmaceutical industry from taking an interest in hemp and cannabis on a 10, 20-year time scale. They will be major players in this space. The best thing you can hope for is clean exits and solid acquisitions. They absolutely will be involved. On a 1-year timeline, that likelihood is very, very low because they haven't activated a lot of that capital already and they don't have the strongest toeholds. Now, this Howard Kessler program could benefit a ton of small businesses as well if we can ensure that the regulatory requirements in order to be a reimbursable product include many of the products like Hometown Hero Gummy, There's no reason that that couldn't qualify as a therapeutic product in the same way, especially with the broad strokes that Howard Kessler's laid out for the president. So that's probably the lane that the pharmaceutical companies are considering the most, is this healthcare-related reimbursements. Now, they're also broadly considering the hemp industry in general, whether that's patent on single molecules, which will likely not stand up in the long run, but is something, again, being paranoid is not a problem in politics. It is a solution. So we are worried about many of these different moves that they're making, but they need to see it be more investable before they actually show their cards on how they're going to attack this space. Now, I know that there's a lot of theories, many of them valid, about the different vectors of attack that they'll be taking and ways that they're going to work their way into areas about this space. But broadly speaking, the bulk of their capital has not been activated in this. And if we set up the federal regulations right, multi-year extension for hemp, and then some pillars of regulation for hemp, we can make it so that that capital acquisition is one of the best things that's ever happened to your small businesses, and not a way of taking them out from underneath you, turning you into the prime targets of acquisitions, exits, and growth, rather than completely supplementing, banning all of us out of existence, and then taking the market into a highly regulated direction. So these are certainly fears that we have and talk about near constantly, because pharmaceutical, beverage as well, and the MSOs all consider regulatory capture of various kinds. And they have 50, 60 years experience in getting regulatory capture. I mean, the whole 3-tier taxation system for alcohol is a form of regulatory capture. The pharmaceutical industry, of course, is replete with different techniques of regulatory capture. So we are walking into the lion's den here, and we have to be eyes wide open, but there's no other direction for us to walk. This is the way that we have to go, and the only thing that we can do is be eyes wide open about all of the different techniques that they might use to try to exert some form of regulatory capture, and try to make sure that we leave regulations in place that do allow small businesses to operate or get acquired in those timelines.
I think it's good to just dovetail on the end of that. A legislator's job, and even the president's job, is to apply reality to regulatory circumstances and regulatory outcomes, right? There's a huge consumer demand for boutique products. We all agree, right? We see it in the organic food industry, we see it in peptides and functional health and medicine. There are certain lanes in all of those industries that are a little bit less regulated, a little bit more accessible. Raw milk, right? There's all of these things that big pharma, big milk, big alcohol, big tobacco, they don't want to deal with it, right? No, just go over there and you just do your thing, and we're going to make the #1 CBD product in the whole world, and we're going to be reimbursable by Medicare and Medicaid. So as we've had these discussions, understanding that at the forefront of the discussion is the enormous consumer demand in the United States, enormous. The polling data that we referenced, I won't say any exact numbers, but the vast majority of Republicans, independents, and Democrats, the vast majority, all want some form of legal hemp, okay? When you apply that to 350 million United States citizens, there is no way pharma or alcohol or tobacco could scale fast enough to meet that demand in 6 months, a year, 2 years. I mean, you're talking Amazon-sized facilities in every major metropolitan area in the entire United States to be able to develop that kind of a grow, that kind of raw material. Right now, the small businesses are an absolute necessity, and they will continue to be that as long as we stand up and fight for ourselves, right? So I don't want all doom and gloom, but certainly alcohol's coming to the table. Certainly tobacco's coming to the table. As cigarette use goes down, they want to convert their farms into some other commodity, right? Instead of corn and canola oil, maybe they'll do hemp, right? So the big industries, and it will be an advantage to us. I know it doesn't really seem like that right now, but once these companies start lobbying for the benefits of hemp and the positive outcomes for consumer, those companies will bring a ton of money to the table, to the lobbying fight, and the small businesses are going to be the thorn in their side that they cannot deny, because the voters will back you before they will back, some billionaire somewhere that no one's ever heard of. So,
All right, I think we got time for maybe two more. I saw these. Yeah, you first, and then we'll go to you.
Yeah, first, thank you guys. You guys are crushing it. I really appreciate it. And if we were in one room like last time, we'd have a packed house.
a little bit spread out.
Yeah.
That's very nice.
So you cover a lot of stuff, a lot of different things, and thank you. We're in Texas, so I just want to get high level what y'all thoughts are about Texas.
I do want to save most of it for Mark. He is absolutely the person that we both defer to, and we really did specifically try to trim it out so that that next talk can focus on some of the Texas stuff. But look, they've set us up for a huge success. Greg Abbott has made sure that the rulemaking agency is making rules despite what has been said at the federal level. So I think that the details of rulemaking, Mark will dive into, but I feel very positively that they'll be able to work with DSHS and that you guys are going to have some really strong regulatory frameworks. Obviously, the vape ban isn't everything that we wanted, but considering where we were in May of last year, the fact that we're sitting here today talking about the vape ban being the worst piece of this is amazing and a huge victory for the Texas Hemp Business Council, for the Texas Hemp Coalition, and for all the other groups that helped lobby in Austin during those days. So I will leave the details of the rulemaking process to Mark, but we think broadly speaking that Texas is in a great space, and we look to the state leaders here in advising us on how to attack many other states, because this was a preeminent marketplace that took the same complexity we would need at the federal level in order to get this done.
I will say this. I had never quite thought of it that way. Texas right now is saying this is Texas, and they're bucking Mitch McConnell and the federal government. They are still going through rulemaking. Damn, that's cool, man. I had not thought of it that way. That is really freaking cool.
Yeah.
The governor of this state is saying, we don't care what they do in DC, we're Texas. We're the fourth largest economy in the world. Everything's bigger in Texas. Have you seen our gas stations? We're gonna do what we want here, and that's amazing. So yeah, certainly leave the details for Mark, but I had never quite thought of it that way. That's really cool.
On a specific letter that said, please ignore the federal stuff and just focus on getting through your rulemaking.
I love that.
For you.
So when the bill first officially passed, I was looking into obviously how to connect the THCA and psychoactives, finished goods like that. And we circle kind of back around to fundamentals on CBD basics, biomass, smokable flower, CBD, processing CBD. I'm seeing a lot of country information. Interstate commerce laws, 0.3% THCA limits. If the bill as it is stands, how does that affect specifically biomass and smokable flower at the CBD level extraction?
And you mean the federal bill?
Yeah, sorry, federal.
Oh, okay. All right. You want to take it?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there is no definition at the federal level for what synthetic means necessarily. There's also not a ton of understanding for work in progress materials. And by what synthetic means, I mean that there is nothing in the US Code of Regulations that defines the word synthetic in this context. The only context in which it's used is artificial, which has to be disclosed on certain food packaging. So we have to look to like the European Union to get clarity around what a synthetic ingredient actually includes. Now, why do I say that to start? Because they don't know what terms they're using. There's too much chemistry baked into the Mitch McConnell language for us to paint out exactly what the implications are going to be for the supply chain that they fundamentally do not understand in the first place. So I am very much on the side of that banned everything across the board because it had so little consideration for what it means to be a work in progress ingredient, and because the way that it now defined goods beyond the farm as being included in this definition where total THC has to be considered. But what does it mean to be a total THC by weight when we're talking about a midstream manufacturing product? Like something like a beverage has a stage in that beverage's life where the beverage itself is a 90% THC distillate that hasn't even been emulsified with surfactants yet. So I don't understand how any of those work in progress materials, from the point that the flower is trimmed, would be compliant under that Mitch McConnell language. And broadly speaking, I think it bans everything, including the vast majority of Charlotte's Web products that theoretically contain no or trace amounts of THC.
If we set all of those aside and just simply focus on CBD biomass and CBD
So-
biomass, like the starting material, how is that even being effective?
Illegal.
Illegal.
I want to take this.
Please.
So one of my favorite talking points in Congress, I was just in DC last week, I've been talking to several members of Congress about this. If the big boogeyman was Chinese imported CBD, THCP, all these Chinese imports, the law that they're implementing basically says you cannot grow the plant here, you cannot manufacture the plant here. The only thing you can do is import from international sources 99.999% CBD isolate and stick that in a bottle and maybe add some MCT oil. So if we're actually worried about international imports, you can't make anything in this supply chain anymore in the United States. You'll have to import the purest form of CBD to avoid criminal liability. So I use that talking point a lot in Congress. I think it's starting to resonate with them. If China is the boogeyman, you just empowered them.
So
You just gave them the entire industry.
Using the same verbiage that you were talking about with synthetic and undefined and processed goods, that language is what is creating the legality issue with even just basic biomass and flowers falling into that same category of legality and 0.3 and all that.
Correct. And look, the real answer to your question of who's going to actually enforce and what will actually be enforced against, we won't know until an agency of enforcement is picked, until they pick a testing method that includes like what do they mean by weight of these products, that addresses what they mean also by goods. Because any of these intermediary products, trimmed flour could be intermediary if the finished good is a pre-roll, or a distillate could be an intermediary if there's some kind of an extraction process going on. So until we have the full details of how they plan on actually rolling out an enforcement paradigm, which they won't even consider until next November, then we can't answer that question accurately. And I think anybody that is telling you that big chunks of this industry will still be legal even under this Mitch McConnell language are being extremely optimistic about what's actually been written on the page, and probably not chemistry experts.
So there's been no rulings in court that set any kind of precedence of what is considered in process or not in process?
Quite the opposite. There have been very mixed language on a state-by-state level of what in process actually means, and a number of states that have explicitly banned and disallowed in process materials from reaching a certain percentage that actually are totally fine with those materials reaching that certain percentage. So the level of detail that your question requires, we have to talk about the reality of regulatory language versus enforcement in this space, and that is exactly where the whole conversation falls apart. So we have states that have very loose regulations and high enforcement, and states that have relatively strict regulations and low enforcement when it comes down to determining what this chemistry means and what in process means.
I think another good point on that. So the enforcement, when we talk about criminal liability, what happens at the end if this ban goes into place and you've still got a warehouse full of goods, if Schedule 3 goes into place, you're going to lower your criminal liability, right? And so I would advocate, if you're here in Texas, go to your Texas state laws, your Controlled Substance Act here in the state. Every state has their own individual one, and look at criminal liability standards for Schedule 3. Likely it's not going to be the feds kicking your door down. It may be, local state police or police departments or sheriffs. But in the broader context of the entire cannabis debate, moving cannabis or marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is a net positive for everyone. It's a huge signal in the right direction for everybody. And I think there's going to be some enforcement paradigms that will develop over the next 6-9 months as that starts to get implemented. But
Look, the biggest first initial hit we're going to take from this is the harvest that are going to be going in next couple months. Farmers have to take this risk of, what am I going to do with this harvest in October? I have 30 days before it goes into effect. What's going to happen? That's
correct.
Thank you all for showing up today and listening to us ramble about what I know is my favorite topic.
Yes.
But I can totally understand why everyone else might glaze over at this kind of stuff. Lobbying is certainly a strange vocation, and we really appreciate, because we wouldn't have the capacity to advocate for folks if it wasn't for the folks like y'all in this room. So big appreciation from both JD and myself with the American Health and Alternatives Association, and from the America First Agriculture team in DC.
How do we get involved with you guys? How do we support your work? What do we need to do?
Please, the American Healthy Alternatives Association is a member-based organization. We have state chapters in many, many states, and JD runs the national branch as well. That's probably the best place to do first level of engagement. And if you're more interested in some of these national movements and getting involved in the super PAC and media spending and some of that high-level strategy, please reach out and we will connect you with the America First Agriculture team as well. So go to AmericanHealthyAlternatives.org.
Or myhealthyusa.org. We shortened it a bit. It used to be much longer. myhealthyusa.org is our website. There's a few different membership levels underneath, and at the bottom, thank you, Cassie, for handing her a card. Engage with us. If you email the info it comes direct to my email, right? So reach out directly to us. We'll engage with you and see if we can't answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna turn into a pumpkin.
Yeah. I'm gonna text him. I'm gonna buy myself 10 minutes.
Hey, man.
Jordan Tate, nice to meet you.
Hey, JD. Nice to meet you, man.
I'm in the Florida Association.
Nice.
Since August, so I just wanted to say hi.
So you guys sitting together?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we go back. We work the green roads together.
Wow. Holy shit.